Hello and welcome by today's episode called The Suffering of Suffering. And at the moment I've got a bit of a cold, so my voice might sound like I'm a little bit blocked up. But that's actually, I thought it's brilliant that this is the case at the moment. It really suits this episode because with the suffering of suffering, it's about having something wrong with you, like me having a cold right now, and then the way you deal with it, which is I don't like being snivelly and having aches and pains, just not feeling well. That's a perfect example of the suffering of suffering. Buddha distinguished 3 types of suffering. The first one is the suffering of change. We've actually been discussing that type of suffering in the previous 2 episodes. It's the sort of suffering when something happens you don't want, you want to keep it away, or something you do want, you want to keep it. So because things change, what you like just doesn't stay, what you don't like still comes. So that's the change that makes you suffer. That is the suffering of change. The second one is the suffering of suffering, which we are going to talk about today. So more about that later. And the third one is actually called the all-pervasive suffering, which we will talk about in the next episode. The suffering of suffering is what most mindfulness courses are about. That is the type of suffering they will help you to deal with. And I can give you an example of that. I was about 19, I think I must have been, when I dropped a friend off who lived somewhere in Rotterdam. And for this I had to take the exit over the bridge called Brienenoordbrug, Brienenoord Bridge, that is. And so I dropped him off, went back home, and it was raining and it was windy, and I just sort of went on the bridge, and it was a real big long bend. And as I drove up, I was doing about 70 kilometers an hour, but then I saw this sign which said sharp bend, 50 kilometers an hour maximum. So I thought, okay, and I only just had my driving license, so I hit the brake. So what happened was, the car started skidding all over the place. And at that moment, I was really, really calm. I thought, okay. And I did all the right things, steered the right way, got the car under control, went over the bridge and thought, phew, thank God for that. But after that, whenever I saw a sign, sharp bend, something would happen within my body. My brain had actually registered that I had been in danger that previous time. And whenever I saw this sign, it made a sort of connection. And what it did was give me a sort of sense of, oh my God, sort of choking up. So I would slow the car down. And if it says 80 kilometers max, I would be doing 80 kilometers. People overtaking me because you can actually go a little bit faster in bends like that. But I was really careful doing that. If I would sit next to someone in the car and they would be doing 90, where it said you can only do 80, I would sort of pull on my seatbelt because I felt like there was some imminent danger. So this is something that your brain does. When things happen in your life, it sort of registers it, and it sort of makes sure you are extra aware in similar situations. Well, I was never really too bothered about this thing with the bridge and with these road signs, because I thought, okay, I just adjust my behavior and I feel okay. It's there was this sort of feeling of unease, but it's not a big fear, something that you should really be traumatized about. So what happened was, when I started meditating, and over the years I was meditating more and more, and without me ever really working on this thing that had happened to me, at one stage I noticed, if I saw the sign, hey, I don't feel as afraid anymore. I don't feel as cautious anymore. I feel okay. So what happened was, by meditating a lot, gradually my brain sort of, I don't know, it's I sort of see it like a sort of cheese slice. It sort of sliced off what happened there. And what it did was, it took it away. Of course, when you've suffered a profound trauma or something really horrible in your life, something that really gets to you, that really hurts and hits you, I mean, it's not always so easy to just meditate. Oh yeah, meditate and it's gone. I mean, that's not exactly the way it works. But there are things we can do. Because I will tell you something like very personal, something that happened 8 weeks ago. I think probably here you see on top of me there's a picture of our dog Donia. 8 weeks ago we were in Scotland and our Donia, who was 3 years and 9 months old at the time, went with us, and we had a vacation planned with all kinds of nice walks. But actually on the second day, I took her out, and I was going to throw a ball for her. There was like a little lane with a small wall. I mean, it only came up halfway my shin. It was only like maybe three stones, 3 bricks high. She was so focused on the ball. She'd already gone off and on that little wall. But then that time she was so focused on the ball, she actually ran into the wall, broke her back, and passed away. Because we had to take her to the vet and had to put her to sleep. This I can tell you now without being too emotional, but this is something that still for the past 8 weeks has constantly been on my mind. Walking where we went with Donia, the things in the house, you know, the things she used to do, and I used to have my plate of food, she would, you know, whenever I would eat something, she would just come up and like look at me like, hey, what are we having? So whenever you eat, like in all kinds of moments in the day, you are reminded that she is not here anymore. And that is a natural thing. That is a natural thing to happen when something is really touching you, when something is really hurting you. So there is a memory that is triggered by a thought, by something you hear or something you see, something you feel, or maybe an image that pops up in your mind. And instead of just letting it go like something that passes, it comes up, and then letting it go, that's not what we do. Because when it means a lot to us, we grab a hold of it. We start thinking, we start churning up other thoughts, and it brings physical reactions. It brings emotions. So let me give you an example about Donia again. So Donia was named after Caledonia, which is the Roman name for Scotland. So my brother-in-law, he said to us, he said, isn't it bizarre? You named her Donia after Caledonia, and she died in Scotland. So when he said that, you know, that straight away you jump into the story, you get all sad, like, yeah, you know, like, okay, why was this, you know, as if it had some sort of meaning. I mean, but because you feel so sad and hurt, that's what happens. And that is a perfect example of the suffering of suffering. And another example was, you know, some thought that occurred in my mind. I thought, you know, because her real name given by the breeder was Heavenly Bliss. And so I thought, you know, like, oh wow, you know, like she was called Heavenly Bliss and she's the first one out of the litter to go to heaven. Again, the thought popped up, and then you sort of build on that, and you start feeling sad again. So this is what happens. You know, like thoughts come, and like a sort of train, it's like a train of thoughts, it sort of pulls you, and it brings up all kinds of emotions and physical reactions. And that is okay, that is normal, that is a logical thing to do. But when you know the theory about the suffering of suffering, you can actually recognize what's happening. So you can see, hey, there was a thought, and I'm just getting into something. I always say it's a train. I'm just getting on that train and I'm being pulled away by this locomotive. And all these little cars are building up, cars with emotions, thoughts, and so on. So when you recognize it, what happens is you actually get a choice. You get a choice to let this train continue and pull you along, or you can do something to bring yourself back to the here and now, you know, by focusing your attention to something that is right here, right now. For me, I always find what works best is when I touch something. So I will touch a surface and then I will sort of assess, is it cold? Is it warm or neutral? Is it smooth, or does it have like a sort of structure to it? So that's the things that I feel for. And then by doing that, by bringing my attention to something that is here, I stop the train. Now, sometimes, you know, when you do this, when you bring your attention, when you focus on a sound of a bird, or you look at something that is here, like sometimes when you do that, the minute your attention wanders off, you might be back in this horrible story of what happened to you. You might be like having conversations in your head. You might be arguing with someone who's not actually here. That happens. So then you have to do it again. You know, maybe feel your feet on the ground, feel, touch. Look outside. What can you see? That is the way to counteract it. It's not something you have to do. I mean, because sometimes I can actually feel like I want to be sad, I just want to grieve, I just let me be, and I just want to build up the strain and cry my eyes out. Fine. But at least by seeing what's happening, by knowing what's happening, I got a choice. And so that is what can help us when things become too overpowering and it's just not handy at that moment. That is what you can do. That is how you stop the suffering of suffering. In order to be able to do that and to become more aware, to see this mechanism of the suffering of suffering, it is important that you meditate, but we will get into that later. That's all for today. I want to thank you for joining me again, and hopefully till the next time. See ya.